Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm Jamil Zanishev. You listen to Brew Strong. With me, my co-host Neil Spake, and my guest here today is Henry Kirk, uh, head brewer at Dark Star Brewery uh, out in the UK. How's it going, guys?
Doing good. Good morning. And good afternoon to you, Henry.
Everybody's very lively today.
Can I just say, I'm so sorry that you're having to do this at 8 o'clock in the morning. It just feels so uncivilized. Thank you for accommodating me. It's 4 p.m. here, but oh God, I feel terrible.
It's 4 p.m. somewhere.
Yes.
Drinking
Cheers.
time. Yes. Yeah, Henry's been a good friend of mine since back in when did we first meet? It was
2016.
2016, yeah.
Yeah, 2016, yeah.
And we met at Fuller's, and then I said, hey, anytime you're in California, come on by. I'll take care of you. And sure enough, he said, well, I'll be there Tuesday.
I hate to do this to you, Jamil, to be accurate, but yeah, I'm coming next week. And imagine my amazement when you were there at Sacramento Airport to pick me up, a man of your word.
Right. I thought you were kidding at first, and then you're like, no, I'm going to be there. I'm like, all right. So we hung out and had a great time, and ever since then, I think we've been good friends.
We certainly have.
Yeah. And we've actually brewed 2 collabs together, which is unusual because usually once I've brewed one collab with somebody, they don't want to do a second one. They're good.
Well, to be fair, it was at 2 separate breweries.
That's true. It's 2 separate breweries. And Neil, you were there with us when we brewed Gale's Prize Old Ale.
Absolutely.
At Dark Star.
My privilege and pleasure.
Well, it was wonderful to have you aboard, Neil.
Experience of a lifetime. And got the pictures to prove it.
Yes, very useful evidence.
Yes.
Proof.
Oh, here's the fruits of our labor.
Yes.
For the lovely listeners and viewers.
Yeah, great bottling, and somebody hand wax dipping those like a madman for a long time.
That was me. That was my major contribution to the whole effort, hand waxing the bottles.
Well, I would say that one of your major contributions was in getting Prize Old Ale brewed again, right? Because it hadn't been brewed in quite a while, probably a decade or more. Yes.
Yes, I think the last time it was brewed was 2009, and the last time it was released was at Fuller's was 2011. So yeah, it'd kind of been sitting undisturbed for about 9 years in tank before I got it shipped from Fuller's Brewery to Dark Star Brewery. I don't know if we want to get into the minutiae of all the various brewery buyouts that got us to where we all ended up.
Right.
But yeah. I first joined Fuller's in 2014, May 19th. And then I first sort of heard about Prize Old Ale probably a year later, I suppose. And basically this incredible beer with this incredible history had just been lying in tank for undisturbed by that point for about 4 years. And in the tank room at Fuller's, which resembles a little bit like the end of Indiana Jones and the what's it called, the first one called, where they've got the Holy Grail, and at the end there's just all these boxes and they're just storing it away. This tank is full of tanks, and it was just there in this kind of neglected, dusty looking old tank. And I remember opening up the sample tap and getting it, and this beautiful sort of russet coloured beer came out, smelling a little bit like Rodenbach Grand Cru, and it tasted just incredible. And I just thought, this is so devastating that this beer is just down here, just kind of neglected. And so that started my campaign within Fuller's and Asahi to get this beer released. And it was wonderful that you guys were there when we actually got to sort of rebrew it. How long ago is that? 7 years later or something. I kind of can't believe it took that long, but here we are.
Right. And so, yeah, the Gale's historic brewery was purchased by Fuller's. It was closing down, and luckily Fuller's purchased it, and they held on to at least brewing. They use the Gale's yeast. They've maintained the Gale's yeast ever since, which I've heard told was 3 different strains of yeast at that point. And so I think John Keeling, the brewing director at Fuller's, he brewed at Gale's a batch using the wood there at Gale's to kind of collect the organisms. So because the wood had its own bacteria and wild yeast and things like that in it, and brewed that batch, and then they took it to Fuller's and packaged it. Is that correct? Or they packaged it there at Gale's, and then he saved some of the beer. He uses kind of a Solera for future beers to maintain that culture of organisms that's been around since King George.
Yeah. I mean, so it's the romance I know that you guys share of these Victorian tower breweries. Horndean, which is sort of north of Portsmouth, had this tower brewery. Excuse me. And the only time they ever used their old Victorian copper, this sort of work boiler, was when they brewed Prize Old Ale. So that was right at the top of the tower. So you're sort of talking 3 stories up. So every time it was brewed, this copper wasn't very well looked after. So work would be leaking out of this thing and just draining down the brewery. So people would be, ow. And so they would boil for 3 hours. And then, yes, as you say, they had these sort of wooden washbacks like you have in single malt whiskey distilleries and things like that to sort of develop a lactic acid bacteria culture. They had this, and so they would store it in there for a year before then bottling it. So the truth is that towards the end, the Gale's brewery hadn't had a lot of investment, so they were having to rough filter everything that they were doing, even their sort of clean normal beers. So John Keeling's wonderful innovation was, the last few brews that they did at Gale's was this Prize Old Ale, this 9% beer, and they got that. And as you say, he got the microorganisms, and then he moved it to Fuller's, and then they did a Prize Old Ale recipe. But then rather than maturing it in wood, because they didn't have any room for it, they matured it in steel, which basically just stainless steel, which basically just sort of cleaned it up a little bit. And really just emphasized, as I say, those beautiful sort of balsamic flavors. But they did, as you say, with the Solera, they did just blend all those Gale's batches in with the Fuller's work that they did. And I think everyone said that there was a huge improvement from when they moved from Gale's to Fuller's. The only problem is that the sales weren't great, so they did that twice, and then it never happened again. So basically by the end there was about 40 hectoliters left in that little benighted tank in the tank room, and I got that shipped to Dark Star in November 2019. So then we had that in a in tank for sort of
a couple of
3
years.
years before we then finally got to brew a new batch, so that which we could then, a 40 hectoliter batch, so we could then mix in with the stuff from Fuller's.
Right. So during those 3 years, did you drink a lot of the old ale off the tank? Did it go from 40 hex to 39?
Yeah, 100 liters. Yep. Well, the problem was I think the reason why it took so long for it to be released, I think obviously COVID had a big problem. That just sort of cancelled everything.
Right.
But I also terrified Asahi by saying that I wanted a wooden washback. So I was talking to Austrian, wood makers. I was talking, and I kept giving quotes to Asahi, like, "Oh, come on, the more complexity we give to this, the more interest we're going to get." And they did not want to give me £15,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that derailed the project for about 2 years, if I can be honest. But I think once they calmed down, once everyone had calmed down, and I said, "No, don't worry, we'll brew this, and it'll be reasonably cheap because there's no American hops. It's
Mm-hmm.
just Goldings and Fuggles. We'll get the yeast for free from Fuller's. This is going to be okay, guys. I promise.
Right.
I'll hand wax it myself. We won't outsource anything." Then they were like, "Okay, yes, go for it." And it was we only bottled 3,600 bottles, but they just sold out every day that we released them. It just sold out straight away. So they were like, "Ooh." So we got there in the end. It was an emotional roller coaster, should we say?
Well, it's all thanks to you, that this beer continues on as surviving. The fact is that so many great beers and so many great breweries, historic ones, die off every year, and certain beers that have been made for 100 years stop being made because it doesn't have Citra and Mosaic, and it doesn't it isn't hazy and all these other things, and it's killing a lot of these classic beers that are just amazing in their own right. And I guess people got tired of amazing, so
Yeah.
who knows. But hopefully this we're trying to get the word out about this Gale's Prize Old Ale. It's really a fantastic beer. Now, Neil, have you had any of them? Are you saving this one?
I have not had, other than what we sampled at the brewery. I have refused to open what few bottles I have yet, so that some others can enjoy it with me. And I just haven't had time to do it. But
you're just not up for chugging a pint of 10% beer?
Well, certainly,
but first thing in the morning.
All the love and effort that went into this, I don't want to waste it.
Yes, I know what you're saying.
And if we could just back up just a hair.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
For any of our viewers or listeners that might not know that term Solera, could you or Jamil or Henry explain what that is? I'm sure lots of people know it, especially people that are into wood aged beers and sour beers and that type of thing. But we may have some listeners that have never heard that term before.
No.
Henry,
shall I?
what is
Jamil?
Go for it, Henry.
Well, I think it sort of it comes from the sherry. I think is where the idea comes from, where you have that particular sort of yeast, and the idea is that you sort of inoculate. And please correct me, guys, if I'm wrong on this. Where you use older beer to inoculate younger beer, and I think the thing about this is so it was very important with the microorganisms, as you say, that because we had those wooden vessels, we had that unique microbiology stretching back to the 1920s when they first started using these vessels. By taking older beer and then mixing it in with younger beer to have, we had 40 hex and then 40 hex of the new stuff to make 80. You're inoculating the batch, and you're sort of keeping that unique flavor alive. Is how I would say it. So put in simply, you're taking older beer and mixing it in with younger beer, and to keep that unique microflora environment going. A bit like sort of like a sourdough starter or something like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good example. Let's do this. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have more about Gale's Prize Old Ale right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking with Henry Kirk, who's was the head brewer of Dark Star, and Neil and I went out to brew with him. It was I gotta take responsibility here. Henry just mentioned, in a conversation, that he got to brew, he got approval to brew Prize Old Ale again. And I immediately said, well, okay, I'll be there. I'm coming. I didn't go like, hey, is it okay? Sometimes you can't can't be polite because there might have been a reason I shouldn't have been there. And then I'm like, yeah, Neil, come on along. Because, Neil's a big fan of all the UK beers as well. So,
Yeah.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you along.
Well, thank you. Hopefully we helped and did not hinder the process too much.
Oh, absolutely, you did. I mean, you worked out the sugar calculations, which was very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And then, Neil, and you were doing a lot of the foot soldiering, cutting up those massive cubes of invert sugar. Because unfortunately we don't have a sort of sugar dissolving vessel there. We had to have these huge 25-kilo chunks of invert number 2 sugar, and just saw it with bread knives and things like that, and then just chuck it in. I mean, it was pretty glamorous, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a sight to behold. I'm telling you.
It was absolutely one of the most fun I've had doing a collab brew ever. And the first collab brew I did with you, we've talked about this before, was we did a blackberry goza at Fuller's, which to this day people still talk to me. They go like, I can't believe you got Fuller's to do blackberry goza. I'm like, I don't know. It was John Keeling. It was Henry. I was just along for the ride.
I mean, even now I get people from Asahi saying to me, why did you do that? Why did you? And I was just like, well, why not? If you're not going to do some crazy stuff once in a while and actually make people go, ooh,
Right.
what's the point? And technically, for us to be able to sour 260 hectoliters of work it was astonishing. I mean, it was, and the team has never been as motivated and as involved as they were that day, because we needed every single one of them, didn't we? I mean, it was, yeah, it was incredible. And then to go in there and be like testing it every couple of hours, like, testing the pH, just seeing it race down. I think it eventually got down to 3.1 or something. I mean, it was thrilling. What a roller coaster. You don't get that feeling when you're brewing London Pride. As wonderful as that beer is, by the way.
Yes. That's got to be my top number one experience collab brewing ever, and I'm not sure it could be beat. And the Gales, it's got to be second. Well, look at Henry. Wow. We do one more together, you're gonna have the top 3. I'm certain of it.
Yes, exactly. Well, now that we're both breweryless, we need to find the location for this to happen. But yeah, we will make it happen.
Yep. Yes. What a blast. All right. So we were talking about the invert sugar and all that. What should we do next? Should we talk about the recipe? And then we can kind of go over the process, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Because based off of my observations when I was there, I came up with this is US 5 gallons, 19 liters, all grain brewing. Your original gravity is going to be 1092 or 22 Plato. Now, final gravity, you're shooting for about 1017 or 4.3 Plato. IBUs is going to be about 46 based on Rager. And the color is going to be somewhere around 19 to 25 SRM, depending on what invert sugar you use. So invert sugars, they come out, there's number 1, number 2, number 3 for British brewing. The higher the number, the darker it is. Your ABV is going to be about 9.8. And let's see here. That'd be 12 pounds or 5.6 kilograms of English pale ale malt, 2.86 pounds or 1.3 kilograms of number 3 invert sugar, or we used number 1 in our brew at Dark Star. But that's one thing. Well, let me finish the rest of the recipe. We'll talk about invert sugar some more. 22 ounces or 624 grams of torrefied wheat, 4.6 ounces or 132 grams of black malt. And let's see here. I went with 1.25 ounce, 4 additions, Fuggles and Goldings at 60 minutes, so 1.25 ounce or 35 grams each. And then at 0 minutes, 1.25 ounce, 35 grams Fuggle and Goldings. Yeasts, I would go with probably White Labs WLP 017 Whitbread 2 or the Y Yeast 1099 Whitbread. And then, if you could get yourself a bottle of Gale's Prize Old Ale, you could use the dregs from that as your your Solera moment where you add that to the beer. And then, or if you can't do that, I would try the White Labs WLP 665 Flemish Ale blend or the Y Yeast 3763 Roselaire Ale blend. And all this, if you don't want to write it down, is going to be in an article in BYO coming out soon. They jammed into the next possible slot they had, and that should be coming out soon. Henry, so talk to us about the invert sugar choices. So invert 1, much lighter in color. That's what we used at Gale's for this Gale's brew, right? It was kind of a cream color. 2 is darker, 3 is fairly dark,
and then you've got the mythical 4 that they don't really make anymore. That's the darkest. I would have loved to have used 2 or 3, so a bit darker, because I think the darker it gets, the bit more of the sort of impurities that you get, the bit more sort of flavor as well that comes through. Put simply, I used 1 because those were the only blocks that they sort of make now. So the company that makes those invert sugars, they've kind of really dialed back on the ones that they do. So yes, that was I would have loved to have gone darker. But given that we put in 25 kilos of black malt and our Anton Par could not read the gravity at that color and that alcohol, I think we were right with 1. But that was unfortunately that was the decision on. There's nothing wrong with 1 particularly. I just find that the sort of darker ones are a bit more interesting from a flavor point of view.
A little more flavor, a little more caramel, a little more raisin, a little more complexity to that overall profile.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you want those ones made, you have to commit to 2 1 metric ton each IBCs, and that would have been a bit difficult to justify, for the powers that be, understandably. Whereas this, I could get I think I bought in about 400 kilos, so we were all right on that of the blocks.
Well, and as home brewers, or even small commercial brewers, you can make your own invert sugar. It's not too difficult. You start with like a turbinado sugar, and you mix it with some citric acid and in water in a pot, and you start heating it up, bringing it to a boil very slowly and gently, and then you let this thing simmer for however long. Initially you let it go for about 30 minutes or so, and that makes you invert number 1. You keep taking it further and further, and you can make as dark an invert sugar as you want. Some people add a little bit of corn syrup to it. If you do, I don't think you want the flavored corn syrup, but they do that in order to keep it from crystallizing. I've not had a problem with it crystallizing. I go just slow and steady. You need a candy thermometer so you can check the temperature. I forget the exact temperatures, but you can find, I think it's around 240 degrees, something like that. You can find it on the internet. It'll also be in the article in Brew Your Own magazine. And you can check that out online. I tell you, there's one person out there that I think should make like a special invert sugar brewing kit, which would be our good friends at Blickman Engineering. I don't know if have you ever met John Blickman, either of you guys?
Yeah, I have definitely.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy, extremely brilliant engineer, and he's created Blickman Engineering, which makes all sorts of equipment for home brewers and even craft brewers, commercial craft brewers now. And you can check him out, blickmanengineering.com. Great friend of the show, been sponsoring the show for 15 years or more.
Yeah.
Which that's why you can get the show for free. While people are charging for their podcasts and things like that, John Blickman has been ponying up and making this happen. So cheers to him. I'm sure he would, what we need is a invert sugar making machine. So you pour the sugar in one end and out shoots whatever color of invert sugar you want on the other end.
Yeah,
Anybody
we're
can
all
do it.
lazy, back, right? All
right.
homebrewers are lazy. So
Yes, me especially. I'm there, because otherwise it takes some time, but it's not that difficult to do at home. Now, if you need 400 kilos of it, that's going to be an issue. But otherwise, not too bad for home brewing. And then so the malt you use was the Simpsons.
It was Maris Otter.
The Simpsons Maris Otter.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was just going to say that I got. It's interesting about the invert sugar, using the invert sugar, because it's towards the end of Gale's, they were using glucose rather than invert sugar.
Huh.
And so I kind of got told off on Twitter because I wasn't being that, true to the recipe. And I'm like, oh, give me a break. I'm allowed to upgrade a little bit, aren't I?
Right.
And it was a similar thing with the Maris Otter. A lot of, it's a funny one because people get so emotional about Maris Otter. People absolutely swear by it. And other people are like, it's rubbish. They're charging double the price. It's all a fantasy. But again, for me, I felt it had to be Maris Otter. I am in Team Maris Otter. I think, it's got a terrible yield and the grains are smaller and all that sort of stuff. But I do believe it imparts a wonderful sort of bready flavor to it. So I thought, look, this might be the only chance I get to brew this beer. So we're going with the big boys.
Right.
But I think for people brewing it at home, I think a lot of British ale malt is great, and you'll do fine with that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I believe fully in Maris Otter. Also Golden Promise is another one. I think those two malts are just spectacular, and if you're brewing any British ale, I would go with those. And in the US you can get those. Enough of it gets shipped over that it's pretty accessible. What were you going to say, Neil?
Oh, I totally agree. You've said this many, many times, Jamil. If you want to make a British beer, you got to use British ingredients. And I completely agree with that, because British and Scottish ales, that's my wheelhouse from a homebrew perspective, as well as, like Henry mentioned, I am fascinated by those Victorian towers. And one thing I learned on this trip that I'd never heard of was something you mentioned earlier, but since we were on the invert sugar topic, is the sugar dissolving vessel. I had never heard that phrase. I think I had seen a picture with the acronym, and I had no clue what it was. So, this trip was just full of, I was like a kid in a candy store learning stuff and taking in, because just like Jamil said, these breweries are closing hand over fist in the UK, and it's criminal. In my opinion, but I don't want to bring everybody down.
No, it really is.
Downer you are.
We've lost a couple last year, which is devastating. But a lot of hanging on.
If people don't appreciate what they have and support these breweries, they're gonna disappear, and it's a darn shame, because they'll never be recreated.
No, they won't.
Yeah, if you know of any of these classic breweries for sale, let Neil and I know. As long as it's below, like, let's say 500 pounds. I think we
Yeah.
can.
there you go.
Damn. Yeah, the pound has dropped against the dollar, but sadly not that much.
No, not that much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
600.
just going to say that I think probably the one of the best bits of the brew day for me was seeing you two drink the original batch. And because I remember you two tried it, and you went silent for a long time, and I was like, we're in trouble here. They hate it. But actually, you guys, I think you were just overwhelmed by it.
On the contrary, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think talking about this recipe, I think the really important thing actually is time. That's the big thing. You know, you're brewing these beers at home, you've got to give them, you've got to let these beers mature. They really, really need that time to marry together. And we were so fortunate in a way that this beer had just been left alone pretty much for 11 years. I mean, when are you going to get that maturation time? You know, I mean, it's sort of extraordinary, really.
Yeah, that it was incredible. It had such a complexity. It really wasn't very sour. But you could get that underlying funk and that hint of tartness and all that blended in with all the great malt flavors. Really something special. And then so that 11-year-old beer was blended in with the new one that we brewed, and then you held that for some months to allow it to develop. As well, right? And then you hand package that into 500 ml bottles, each one hand wax dipped, which that's some pretty good wax dipping there.
Yeah, there were big variations in the waxing, it has to be said.
So you did how many bottles by hand?
About 3,600. I think so. It was barely sort of, a couple of pallets, really. There were reasons for that why there weren't more, but we'll.
There's only so many Henry can wax dip.
Exactly. There was only so much gold wax in the UK at that time. But yeah, it's. I mean, it's interesting. Again, what you say about it not being particularly sour, I agree with that, because I think people were desperate for this beer to taste really Bretty. People really wanted that Brettanomyces, and I think it'd never really been there. You know what I mean? I think if it had been there, I think we still would have had that. So I think there is a bit of lactic acid. I think there's some things there. But yeah, as you say, it's a lot smoother and kind of richer. But yeah, I did get a lot of messages being like, "Where's the Brett?" And and I think that's another thing that's great about this beer, that it is a historical British style. And I'm not, the Brett heads, I love you, respect. But it's interesting that this went another way, Well,
and I think this is quite historic, and it will develop in the bottle as well. If you get a chance to buy some, you need to buy more than one bottle. You need to buy as many as you can afford, or as many as you can find, because you're going to want to store those, and they will develop over time. And hopefully I can hold on to one for at least a few years, and we'll see how that comes out. Maybe
there'll be plenty in my garage. So next time you come round, if you come around once a year for 10 years, we'll see.
Sounds great.
To be fair, there is a bit of funk there, I suppose. That's not, but it's not hugely oval sort of wettiness to me, I would say.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would really be appropriate in this beer. I think it's you want it to be a bit of funk, melding in with the all the other flavors that are there. It's kind of got a nice bready malt, and some caramel, and it's got some fruitiness to it as well. Just overall really, really nice old ale. I think one of the best that I've ever had. And I've had older versions of the Gales. And I was just chatting with Julia Hertz from the Brewers Association, and she was mentioning that she had some bottles in her cellar that she was going to go ahead and give those a try, and we chatted about the brewing of this and brewing of ESBs as well. So it's kind of fun. Let's take another short break, and when we come back, we'll have more about Gale's Prize Old Ale after this. All right, we're back. Talking Gale's Prize Old Ale with Henry Kirk of Dark Star fame. And let's see, where were we? We're talking about brewing Gale's Prize Old Ale. So the day of the brew, you guys had doughed in, and then we added we ran off the wort, got in the boil kettle, and I think, how long was our boil? It was only what, 60 minutes, 90 minutes? We didn't go the 3 hours.
It was 2 hours.
2 hours.
So I was desperate to do 3 hours. I was
Yes.
really, you guys were there. I should say Anthony Smith, who a colleague from Fuller's, who he worked at Gale's, so he was a major guy in terms of our information and really helped with this project. Brilliantly, he was there as well. And he was like, Henry, we don't need to boil for 3 hours. So we kept testing throughout the boil, didn't we? And then it got to the 2 hour mark, and we were like, with the sugar and everything, we got there. We got where we wanted to be. So we were like, okay, all right, fine. I know that that's how they did it at Gale's, but 2 hours would be enough. And it looked sort of dark enough. And then hilariously, because we chucked in all the chunks of sugar, we had a big problem, didn't we? Transferring it into the whirlpool.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of back flushing, shall we say?
Yeah.
That was a great moment. Even though at Dark Star we had a external calandria and a sort of spreader, so I was hoping that we would get it all mixed. The outlet point is a little bit higher than the bottom, so I think there was a big old clump of invert sugar that just sat there. But that was a bit of a difficult moment, because I was sort of thinking, are we going to have to abandon this, or what is happening here? This is going to be, I'm just going to have to pretend that we never brewed this. It's never happened. But luckily we were able to just blast some boiling hot water back and clear the pipe. And as soon as I saw it going into the whirlpool, I was like, oh my God, this might happen. We might actually do this. This beer might get into an FV.
I think it's safe to assume anytime I'm there, it's going to be challenging, and it's questionable whether the beer will be made, because I remember you saying that when we were brewing at Fuller's. We're like, hey, we may have to just dump this. It's like, no. It was the paraflow was the issue there. Yeah, that, and they had to reprogram everything in the system to allow us to use a kettle twice for the same beer, because
they did not like that. The computer said no. A lot of people had to do a lot of work, and I felt bad. But as I say, everyone managed to do that.
And I think everyone was thrilled to see it work.
Yeah, that's right, because we had to get the beer we boiled it for 15 minutes, wherever long it was, and then we had to get it down to 30 degrees or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it hits that target, it's like, I want to get rid of this now. This needs to be transferred now. It's like, no, this has got to stay here for 24 hours.
Yeah.
So the computer system did not like that. But we managed to, the computer guys managed to override a lot of stuff. It's probably never recovered since.
That was a blast. And again, why I had so much fun every time I'm with you is because you end up having me do things, and that I am uncomfortable with. I'm just like, I'm going to screw this up. Henry's just having me do this so he has somebody to blame, I think. Jamil, calculate how much inverse sugar we need to add. I'm like, okay.
Well, you look like you had some sort of calculator on your on your phone, or you had a formula in your mind, and I was like, thank God, because I hadn't really thought that far ahead.
It was just the calculator app on my phone. That was it. I didn't have a calculator. I didn't have to do it, longhand with a sheet of paper. But yeah, I'm like, well, how much is sugar per pound per gallon? Did some quick math, and apparently it worked. So I was very relieved when it worked.
No, it did. Because the way I was going to do it, this shows you what an incredible technical brewer I am, because I was just going to keep adding sugar until we got where we wanted. And then, yeah, so you saved a hell of a lot of cooling, a lot of sampling.
Right.
Yeah.
The fact that you trusted me is still just blows me away. So,
but look, always blame the work experience boy. They're not there anymore. It's crucial.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was in charge, but Jamil, I don't know what happened to him, man. He went crazy.
All right. And then how did you decide on the hopping for this?
So the hopping was interesting because at Gale's they used whole leaf hops. Again, as is traditional in British brewing, there was loads of really big hop charge at the start, and that's and that's important because all these breweries had hop backs, so they really love to use a lot of hops at the start of the boil to really once you drop the copper into the hop back, which is basically like a mash tun. They really like having a lot of hops there to kind of filter all that proteinaceous, trubby material. So looking at the recipe from the only Gale's book I had to hand, which was the 1989 one, they had loads of Goldings and Fuggles right at the start, and not a lot of aroma. Like actually, I think actually probably they didn't have any at the end, which again is kind of quite usual for these beers that would have been matured for a long time. You're not going to get a huge amount of fresh hop aroma. So working with a different system, working with a system with a Lauter tun and a separate kettle and whirlpool with type 90 pellets, I wanted to keep true to that. And then, so I added 10 kilos of Goldings, 10 kilos of Fuggles, an IBU of 45. But because adding hops to the whirlpool is so ingrained, I thought, why not? Let's give it a go. And we whacked in a little bit more Goldings and Fuggles in the whirlpool as well. So yeah, I just thought because we weren't able to completely match what they were doing back then, I had a bit of freedom to sort of do what I wanted to do. And also a Dark Star was made famous by using American hops, but every time I got to use some English hops, I'd go crazy. Like, let's put it in the whirlpool as well. I just loved opening the bags, I was like, yeah, please more. So yeah, that was the hopping regime. So I think it was important. The 45 BU was accurate. That's what they were getting at Fuller's. So that's the BU that they were getting. So I thought as long as we hit that, I could play about a bit, why not? Right. It's my party.
Right. Balancing it between the different additions. And then now what about fermentation? When we were there, transfer with oxygen, and then you and Anthony had those blue cubes of yeast that were grown up in the Fuller's lab. And Anthony was saying that it had the Gale's yeast was 3 different yeasts that comprised the Gale strain.
That's right. Yeah. So definitely there's a Whitbread strain in there. I know they sort of called the 1, 2, 3 or something. So definitely know there was a Whitbread one. As for the other 2, I'm not sure. I mean, that was a pretty hilarious moment when we got round to opening up those 25 kilo drums, because even though we sent them in a refrigerated truck, they had still expanded a lot. So Anthony had filled them up from the yeast storage vessel, the Gale's, the specific Gale's yeast storage vessel. And you saw that. And so when we opened them up, whoa, I got gunged by, there's a lot of photos of me just covered in gunk. Every time one got handed to me, I opened it up and it just flew out. So yes, we got 8. There was 8 drums that we poured in. And God knows actually what the real weight of that all was. I mean, some of them were half full, some of them were brim full. I mean, it was kind of crazy. I mean, at Fuller's, they work on the sort of a litre of yeast for a hectoliter of beer, depending on the yeast viability, of course. So that's kind of, we were doing, and because it was strong at 9%, we went a bit over that sort of ratio. And then then once it was all poured in, I mean, you can imagine, you know, we poured all the yeast in. Oh my God, I can't believe it. It's only in April, but were we transferring? Had we actually started casting by the time the yeast had gone in? Or did we pour the yeast in first and then go in?
I think you poured the yeast in first because you had the door open, the manway open to add the yeast. And I think if you were transferring in at that point, you wouldn't have.
Yeah, it would have been a real race against time. It would have been pretty terrifying. So I think that's the way we did.
You seemed relatively calm, so I'm guessing the wort wasn't pumping in at a rapid clip while you were trying to.
No, and you know me, I'm never calm under those situations. But so we poured it all in, shut the door, hosed it all down as well. I had to go and get changed, and then then we started pumping, and we put the oxygen in, and then when I came in the next morning, I oxygenated it again.
Another dose of oxygen,
and that was it. And it fermented like crazy. It went mad. It had the time of its life in there.
Well, and I felt bad because you were saying, boy, it tastes hot, you know, right after fermentation, which, you know, I was like, you should add a second dose of oxygen. And then, but Anthony said the same thing. He goes, Gale's, they oxygenated a second time, but that yeast is a ripper. That will chew through anything. And it's a very strong yeast. It's a survivor.
It is, and again, that's a very similar thing with a lot of these old family yeast, like Breakspear, for example. There's a local brewery to me that still uses that Breakspear yeast based in Henley upon Thames, and that will rip through a 3.8% pale ale in 24 hours. That's what the family brewers like. They like yeast that doesn't hang around, you know, that does its job and, you know, flocculates the bottom or rises to the top or whatever. But, it's not unusual. It was a bit frightening, to be honest with you, watching how quick it was going. I was like, whoa, have I absolutely messed this up? But it came out all right in the end.
Well, I think those higher alcohols that get created in a condition like that, they eventually with some organic acids in there and the higher alcohols will esterification will occur, and you'll get a little bit more of those esters that are key to a lot of the British beers, and especially something like this. So I think it's a good way to go. I think it's proved out in the taste of the beer. It's just fantastic. Neil, you're gonna have to drink one of those.
I know.
Very soon.
Well, I know on that subject about Gale's yeast, I know what from an ester point of view, to me, British beers, that's the yeast character is also as critical. And Fuller's, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Henry, I hope that they still make Gale's HSB, Horndean Special Bitter. That was one of my favorites when I was over there 5-6 years ago. And that it really brings out the character that the Horndean, the Gale's yeast, without, with this beer, obviously we had other things going on, but with a really simple British, bitter like that, the character of that yeast really comes through. And it really struck me because it is different. It's different than drinking a London Pride or a Fuller's ESB. It has its own character.
Yeah, you can taste the Whitbread lineage, I think, in those beers. It has the Whitbread. All the Whitbread yeasts have a, kind of that. I don't know how to describe that character other than saying tastes like Whitbread. I was able to have it at what's the tiny little Fuller's pub with the back in a little alley, and I think it had the
The
cherry
Dove.
tree. Yeah.
The Dove in Hammersmith, or
Yeah, it might be. It had the cherry tree that the young princess or queen danced around. Where is that?
Oh.
It's often a little backwards. Anyways, had it on cask. The Gale's Prize Old Ale. So I felt very lucky to be able to have that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting at HSB, we because you also have the FV, the vessel size, Slim's Chronicles versus open round fermenters and things like that. That also has a big impact on esters, but that's another story.
Yeah, open fermentation and is a huge impact on things like that. We all went to Harvey's when you were out there with us, Neil, and yeah, they've got those open fermenters, and I'm still just blown away by the fermentation character of all the Harvey's beers. Not really funky, weird, or anything, but there is a complexity to that fermentation character that I don't think any other beer has. They're Sussex Best. My God, that is such an incredible beer.
I totally agree.
And the old ale. Henry, I don't know if I told you this, but I muled in my luggage a couple of 5-liter those mini casks that they have.
Oh,
I picked up a 5-liter of the Sussex Best and the old ale and brought it home with me, and just amazing. Just tasted so fantastic. But there's no yeast in there.
Yes.
Zero
they're very
yeast.
serious about that. Yeah. No escape.
No escape. I'm gonna have to get in there and just dive in face first into the fermenter and scoop as much yeast into my body as I can, and maybe I'll be able to have the yeast that way, permanently part of my biome.
Wasn't there a story about the Germans in the 19th century using an umbrella or something to go, and they went to Burton and they somehow managed to nab the yeast that way? You need to do something like that.
Yes, I'm going to carry little sterile vials with me, and as long as they don't mind me just getting a little scoop. It's a little bit. That's all I need. Be fantastic. My life would be complete at that point. All right, one last break, and we'll come back. We'll wrap up talking about Gale's Prize Old Ale right after this. All right, we're back. I want to tell you about one of our other fine sponsors, Brew Chatter, up in Sparks, Nevada, right next to Reno. Great folks. They'll have everything you need to brew Gale's Prize Old Ale right there, and anything special that you want, they can get it for you, and they could even teach you how to make invert sugar on your own if you decide to go with the magical mystical invert number 4 in this beer. You certainly could. It'd be quite fun. So check them out, brewchatter.com. Great folks, Josh and RJ, love those guys. If you get a chance to swing by there, if you're ever in Reno, you gotta stop by and say hi and check them out. They even have a little bar in there where you can try a lot of the local beers that they curate kind of a very fine list of local beers there. Very enjoyable. Check them out. All right, so let's see. You had the fermentation, and the fermentation was done in just a couple of days, right?
Yeah, pretty much 48 hours.
Yeah. And at what point did you merge this with the Solera, the held over beer from 2011?
Well, that was the most terrifying moment. That was the really
don't screw this up. Yes,
exactly. They could have been a real obscenity, like profanity.
Yeah.
So I waited 6 weeks, so sort of end of May, and I thought, look, come on, let's do it. We've got to do it. So I moved the Prize Old Ale from its FV, where it had been staying for the last 3 years, put it in a dish bottom maturation vessel, kind of took a breath, and then put in the new stuff sort of underneath, sort of filling it from the bottom. Yeah, and then after a day, I mixed it together, blasted it through again through the spray ball there, and yeah, and then I just left it for 6 months, which is kind of what I wanted to do, because I wanted to sort of, I think these beers, these price old ales, really hark back to those sort of Marzen ales, those sort of harvest ales where you would brew it in March for October, you know, you store it. So I wanted to give it at least 6 months. And I think because also there was a bit of diacetyl in the fresh beer, so I wanted to leave that for a little bit to try and mop that. I don't think it completely went. There's still a bit of that in the bottle, but again, I think that'll dissipate over time. But yeah, it was kind of, again, I don't know whether this is very scientific to say 6 months, but that was a real thing in my mind, wanting the blend to have 6 months together.
Yeah, to not rush it. Let it start to develop, you know, especially if, you know, when you transfer, did you purge the maturation vessel with CO2, or did you allow there to be a little bit of oxygen?
I did purge it with CO2.
Yeah.
There was a lot of moments in this process where I was like, oh, should I just do this? And I sort of erred on the side of caution. I think it would have been fine to not be quite as worried about that, but I think, you know, I think in the end it was good to go that way and purge it with CO2 and eliminate some risks.
You probably pick up a little bit of oxygen in the transfer anyways.
Yeah.
The active biome of yeasts and bacteria probably suck that up pretty quick, but I think in home brewing, I don't think you need to be too cautious about it. I think you know, it could add to the character. So yeah, I think it'll turn out well. I have been a big fan of old ales, and I've tried some. People have gifted me bottles and things like that over the years. And again, I think that, you know, you've done just a brilliant job with this, Henry. I think that's one of the reasons that you know, maybe they'll keep on brewing this. So after you package this, how much beer was left over?
It was probably about, we put quite a lot into cask, which was nice. It was really great to see it on draft in pubs.
Yes.
I mean, again, that was another incredible moment. You know, we launched it in the Harp. If people don't know that pub, it is pretty much the #1 cask beer pub in London. We had a launch there. That was real bucket list stuff. So yeah, of the 80 hectolitres, we probably packaged about 30. So there was sort of 50 left. And that's been transported back to Fuller's.
Back to Fuller's to be held for the next brew. Any idea if they, you know, it's been successful enough? They're talking about next year, or are they talking a few years down?
Yeah, they're talking about it. It's a really wonderful thing about this.
Right.
I think even though we only sold quite a small amount, you know, 3,000 litres, it really got people talking. A lot of journalists got on board. Martin Cornell, all these wonderful people. Roger Protz, and yeah, I think I don't know exactly what's happening, but I think we will see this. We will see this next year. I think there's definitely talk about brewing it this year, brewing a new batch to blend, and then yeah, maybe releasing next year, early next year.
Right.
Don't hold me to that, but I think they're definitely talking about it, which is the good thing.
So if Fuller's needs somebody to come in and calculate the sugar, you know, I'm available.
I think we know somebody. Yeah.
Well, believe me, when they rebrew it, we're all going. Neil, pack your bags. I'll let you guys know when they rebrew it. We'll be there.
Fantastic. I would be there in a heartbeat.
Such a pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
No question.
So watch this space.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else people should know about this beer or anything before we wrap up?
It's currently there. No exports have been done to the U.S. Correct, Henry? If you want this beer, you got to go to the
You get
UK.
fly over to England, pick some up, fly back. That's how it works.
And it'll be worth it.
I think it's worth it. Yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there was a lot of greedy customers. A lot of people ordered a lot of bottles.
That's a good
So
thing.
people are sitting on a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, you might be able to get some in the Fuller's shop. So yeah, you got to come to London, which you'll love anyway. You'll have a great time.
Right.
But while you're there, see if you can find some of these bottles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. It's been a fascinating journey, and I'd love to, stay involved however possible. You folks who are listening live and listen on the podcast, try to support breweries like these and these efforts like this, and the historic breweries. Once it's gone, it's too late. It ends up turned into apartments, and all is lost. So let's not let that happen. Make sure you support our fine sponsors, Blickman Engineering. You can email them, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. That'll go straight to John Blickman himself, and you can tell him how much you love or hate this show. And as long as the number of loves outweighs the hates, we'll continue to do this. Check out our friends Josh and RJ at brewchatter.com. Good folks. They can even ship you the stuff to make Gale's Prize Old Ale. I'm sure we'll have a kit ready, quickly now that I've put them on the spot. Get ready that you can just order, because they listen too. They listen to the show, so they know what stuff I've caused them to do. All right, that's it, everybody. Until later, brew strong.